Hi everyone, Chanukah Sameach. It is December 1st, 2021. It's the third day of Hanukkah. It's almost sunset, so it's almost the fourth night of Hanukkah. We are happy to be here coming from the studio, so to speak, at SAR Academy. I am here with Dr. Teena Lerner and Dr. Josh Milner, members of our Medical Advisory Committee. The entire Medical Advisory Committee has been working nonstop, 24/6 over the last 20 months to advise us and our community, and we're very grateful for that. And we are here this afternoon to talk about vaccines, kids, the effect on SAR, the effect on the community, what the next couple of weeks and couple of months will look like. And we look forward to a productive conversation. My name is Rabbi Binyamin Krauss. I'm the principal of SAR. This is our second opening up podcast. Thank you to Yael Baker for developing this podcast and getting it out there for our audience. And thank you to you for being here in person this afternoon. Dr. Teena Lerner received her PhD in virology from the Rockefeller University. She also has an MBA from NYU and has spent over 30 years as a healthcare industry analyst, evaluating pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical diagnostics companies and their products from inception through market. Dr. Lerner, thank you for being here. You're also a proud Safta now at SAR.
Absolutely.
How many grandchildren do you have here?
Eight.
8. Okay, keep them coming. Sounds good. Sounds good. Dr. Josh Milner is an internationally renowned physician, scientist whose research has uncovered the genetic underpinning of allergic diseases in children, formerly of the NIAID, now the chief of the Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Rheumatology in the Department of Pediatrics at Columbia University, and professor of pediatrics at the Institute for Genomic Medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Did I get that mostly right?
I think so.
We'll take it. Thank you both again. Really, thank you for your I don't know what to call it, service, love, care for our community, because you and the other members of the team, Dr. Rocker and Dr. Lisker, have all been really, really incredible together with our nurses at helping us navigate the uncertainties of this pandemic. So I'm going to start with what's been going on now. We thought we were headed in a certain direction, and all of a sudden, all we hear on the news is Omicron. What's Omicron? Why Omicron? How Omicron? What are we going to do about it? How much does it change what we know or what we don't know? And I know that you might not have the answers to these questions, but give us a little bit of insight. Dr. Milner.
I can definitively tell you it's a Greek letter. But in addition to that, indeed we don't know a ton. Everybody in the world is looking for little morsels here and there that can give us clues. It is possible that it is more infectious than Delta. We don't have any indications that it's more dangerous than Delta, or a lot more dangerous than Delta. We don't have any indications of that right now. You'd have to look at large swaths of the population before you really have an idea, and it really is likely to be just a matter of days before we know a little bit. There are two ways that we're really going to evaluate it to really have a much better idea. The first way is looking in the lab, and that's by just looking at measures that might correlate to whether people are immune if they've been infected with a different strain prior or if they've been vaccinated or both. Those just correlate for us. They give us an idea, but they don't tell us how it's going to actually play out in the real world. The way that plays out is by looking at individuals who get hospitalized and seeing if they are sicker, if there are more of them, if it is in people who were more likely to have been infected or vaccinated prior. That's really the only time we're really going to know. Until then, it's all going to be sort of extrapolating from very small samples, and that can be dangerous and give us the wrong idea. It is absolutely possible that it could also be a milder disease, even if it's more infectious.
And so I was going to ask about that split. So it's possible that even for vaccinated people, this might be more infectious, there might be more breakthrough infections, but that the vaccination will still protect against illness. Is that possible?
So for all of the variants so far, the vaccination protects against the illness significantly, even though it may be possible for you to get infected. But remember, infected even means something different when you've already been vaccinated. It's not quite the same as sick and infected. There will be people who get sick. It's a smaller number when they've been vaccinated, or if, in some cases, if they've been infected recently. But the this particular virus, irrespective of the prior immunity, may be a mild virus. It's just as likely to be that as it is to be the same or to be more severe. There were reports, the initial folks in South Africa did say they only saw it in mild cases, which is why people are hopeful that it's not terrible, but that they were looking on a college campus where you're not necessarily going to see so many mild cases, and also you're not following these people long term to find out what happens.
Are we going to see, is this like, are we going to get news every day on this? Real news and data, real information is going to be every day, every week, every month? I know Israel's closed for 2 weeks, so everyone's following that, of course.
The news will be by the half hour, I suspect. The real decent read on what's going on is going to take a full 2 weeks. Because you have to actually get the virus, isolate it, get it into a lab that can study it, and repeat their studies and compare to the way other people study it with different methods before we're really going to have that first inkling of which way it's going to go in people who are immune. And it really will be, we'll just see how much it spreads. Sounds like it does spread very fast, but it was in areas that are not well vaccinated, it does spread. It sounds like it does spread very fast. So we'll have the numbers at a certain point in time, unfortunately, to know whether it's more likely that one would get very sick.
And now we're going to move from science to policy a little bit, and this is we're all obviously trying to get the information that we need to get, and we're all aware of the fact, and certainly we've become more humble over the last 2 years, that there are so many things that we don't know. So when you're in that period of not knowing, I've heard some people say, well, then don't change any practices until you know, and I heard other people saying, well, change a lot of practices until we know. How do you manage that, navigate that question?
Well, I think for this one, we can start with the operating assumption that it's similar to the experience that we had when Delta took over for the previous variants. And we're all set up to have the mitigation strategies and the vaccination and everything else. So I think and since we're talking about maybe a couple of weeks till we have a lot more information, there's not a whole lot of huge policy changes that should be made right now based on the discovery.
Okay, that's helpful.
I would also add that it's unfortunately not a surprise that this is happening because it's a highly mutating virus, and viruses basically try to reproduce themselves as efficiently as possible, and every once in a while they succeed. And if it wasn't Omicron, it might have been it was bound to be another one. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of in the expectation. And the fact that the companies who are working on the vaccines have all been set up in their labs to study every new variant that came along, with the idea that if they had to go into warp speed again as they did the last time, they could do it.
Okay. And Dr. Lerner, you've been incredible at following every piece of news. I think you've watched all the hearings.
I'm a geek for the FDA hearings.
It's pretty amazing how you pick up that information. So, can you update me? Can you update us on I know that New York State, the governor did make some kind of statement, or maybe it was a New York City statement about it wasn't a policy change, but some changes in recommendations. Is that what's been going on the last couple of days?
I guess that's what the city announced, and although stronger recommendations for masking indoors.
Stronger recommendations for masking indoors. Now we're under a mask mandate in school anyway.
School, it's not going to change.
All of our vaccinated students are under a mask mandate, although it's hard. I think that it's kids and adults see through some inconsistencies. So I think the mask mandate for vaccinated populations has been something that we've been grappling with, which we can talk about. But in school, it's not really much of a choice because there is a law. But yes, so I've seen that, some recommendations, but not exactly policy changes yet. And I guess we're kind of biding our time to see where it goes. Yes.
The one other thing that I would add is that again, during the time when we're uncertain, so there may not be significant policy changes for those who are already vaccinated and who already practice certain distancing and masking behaviors already. But for those who don't, who thought maybe, this is all over, those folks might want to redouble their efforts on those practices if they're not vaccinated, this is yet another good reason to get vaccinated, even if the vaccine does not perfectly match this new variant. It will be protective to some, including to variants that already exist now.
Right.
And so that will be helpful. And then also, right, in places where you would normally, and in crowds where there are differences of practices that are just personal preference, just to consider that we don't know what's coming, and that it might be the better part of valor to have practices that are more careful, regardless of what the the particular recommendation happens to be, or I should say mandate happens to be in the area at the time.
Right. I saw the president. I forgot the language exactly. He said, he certainly encouraged no panic, but certain level of caution. Obviously, trying to find the balance between not just ignoring things, because when you have new information, you have to take it seriously. You also don't want to create a state of panic every time. First of all, that will take away from confidence in the vaccinations, which is important and has been proven to be successful. So I guess in our smaller groups and smaller communities, we're trying to find that balance as well. So let's move to the conversation that we thought we were going to have before we knew about Omicron, and we originally asked you to have this conversation about the particular EUA approval, all right, emergency use authorization for the 5 to 11-year-olds, which happened at the beginning of November. Again, Dr. Lerner was spot on. I think in August she told me Thanksgiving would be around Thanksgiving, a little bit before Thanksgiving, and you were really, really close to that date. I think our November 14th was the day that we had vaccinations in school, which was around 10 days or so after it was approved. Just to share information with everybody, I think right now we had about 630 eligible 5 to 11-year-olds at SAR. 500 of them are not fully vaccinated because that's almost not possible yet, but 500 of them have their first dose. Many of them will have their second dose this Sunday, December 5th here at SAR, but many have taken their doses elsewhere, which is great. So I think we're at about 500 out of 630. I think we're around around 80%, and certainly in our school community, it's higher than that. Although we have to remember we have 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds here who are not part of this group. And again, as you know, anybody 12 and up, we had a vaccine mandate. So that means that all of our staff are under a vaccine mandate. All of our students 12 and up are under a vaccine mandate. I guess I'll just say by way of introduction, and these were conversations that we were all part of, there were a couple of factors that led to the vaccine mandate for the 12 and up population as opposed to the 5 to 11 population. One of them being that summertime was a time that we were able to give people information that they could make decisions about their comfort level, and we're happy that they felt comfortable, or certainly felt comfortable enough to be vaccinated to come to school. Something that was approved for a 5 to 11-year-old population, where I think the level of discomfort is a little bit greater for reasons that we can talk about, and the fact that it came in the middle of the school year. So we made the decision, at least for now, not to mandate that vaccine. That's a discussion that the medical committee and our lay leadership will continue to have. I know that there are some schools out there. I'm on the NICE's listserv, the independent schools. There are some schools out there that are mandating it even for now, for January, and others that haven't mandated it for 12 plus. So this is where we are, and that's the decision that we made so far. Let's talk to people who might be on the fence around this vaccine. What's the argument for it, or what should their hesitations be, and how would you've had this question a million times, so how would you respond?
So one of the first responses that I would have as a pediatrician is that my initial reaction to any vaccine or that type of a thing is that while I think it's a very low level of concern that I have overall, it's an even lower level of concern in the 5 to 11-year-olds than in older folks.
Why is that?
There are a number of inflammatory conditions that happen far more in puberty or when you're through puberty than when you are younger, and in particular the concern about the heart inflammation that at maximum about 1 in 6,000 boys around age 12 to 15 at least in Israel. It's probably more rare than that. And it, of course, was very mild in 90-something% of the folks who got it. So you're talking about really more like 1 in around 600,000 who got something that was more significant, that had any health consequence to them. But regardless, that is the population that gets that kind of inflammation to certain viruses and things like that, and can have reactions a little bit more, and I stress a little bit more, not really that meaningfully more. And in the younger ages, they don't as much. And even our preliminary, there have been millions and millions and millions of doses already given, and there have been, it doesn't look like we're seeing more. If anything, we're seeing less of the heart inflammation after the first dose. We'll see after the second dose how that looks. But even after the first dose, it's far less than it was looking like, and that's what we would have predicted. So actually, I'm far more comfortable giving it to younger kids than older folks.
Dr. Lerner?
No, and I was really, I was very impressed at the FDA meeting. One of the statisticians there showed a set of slides where they did a statistical analysis looking at any individual child, what is that child's risk of COVID and a bad outcome from COVID versus that child's risk of myocarditis and a bad outcome from myocarditis.
So there are risks, potential risks on both sides.
Right. So it's the choice of not doing anything, you're running the risk of COVID. And there's statistics behind it. And basically they did a bunch of different scenarios. The risk of myocarditis was kind of a static number. The risk of COVID depended on what scenario was happening out there. So they looked at different scenarios. And in almost every single scenario, the risk of COVID, of a hospitalization from COVID, of a really bad outcome from COVID.
Even for young children.
Even for young children. There's stats on it. Was always several-fold higher than the risk of hospitalization from myocarditis or a very bad outcome from myocarditis. The only scenario where it was even up was the scenario of, what do they call it, June of 2021, when we were at the nadir of COVID. So if you believe that COVID's going away, so if you have that belief, then yes.
Wait it out. And
whatever, take your chances. But look what we are. A few months later, it's coming back with a vengeance. So the risk-benefit ratio, even for the children, is overwhelmingly favorable.
Now, to be sure, the risks are low for children, and people have been talking about that for a while. And I'd like to believe it's still true. I don't know. The risks are very, very low for children on both sides of this ledger, right?
Yes, and actually, let's put some numbers on it. So again, the very maximum of any bad outcome from the vaccine, different than the placebo, is the myocarditis.
Okay.
That's the only concern right now, is the myocarditis. And again, the Israelis were a bit of an outlier and showed 1 in 6,000 teenagers who got a very mild case of myocarditis that you may not have even known you'd had if you weren't worried about it happening because of the vaccine, overwhelmingly. Okay, so like I said, it's more like 1 in 600,000 who's going to have a more consequential myocarditis in response to the vaccine. Those are big numbers, okay? That's a ridiculously, 1 in 600,000 is, you should play the lottery, right?
Okay.
So then but on the flip side, somewhere between 1 in 700 up to 1 in 1,000 children who is infected with COVID develops the multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children, the MIS-C. That buys you a multi-day stay in the hospital, you often in the ICU, requiring very serious treatment. I've seen someone in our community who got MIS-C with having a mild COVID, and then a child between ages of 5 and 11 who developed MIS-C right here in our community, and it was touch and go.
1 in 700 to 1 in 1,000 versus?
1 in 6,000 to 1 in 600,000. It's that simple.
6,000 and 600,000 that's a big spread, right?
Yeah. So again, the 1 in 6,000 is a mild myocarditis
Got
that
it.
has no long-term consequences. The 1 in 600,000 is where there's actually something where someone gets sick, and so
it's still reversible.
Yeah. And MISC is life-threatening, is serious. You go to an ICU for days and days. We've all taken care of it, and it's nothing close to that. And it is, and very much is within the Jewish population. We've saw multiple children with it. This is the age range where this happens.
So from your perspective, both the numbers and the kind of potential, if I may say, worst case scenario, so to speak,
Correct.
is what we know so far, are both kind of very much, from your perspectives, in favor of the vaccine, even at this age. Because some people are saying, and I think it's kind of out there a little bit, oh yeah, the 5 to 11s have to get it to protect the other people, which becomes like an interesting ethics, values type of question. It doesn't sound like you're seeing it that way, although that would be an interesting conversation anyway. But
Also,
Right. Yeah, exactly. But not primarily. And I'll go back to the FDA and the CDC. When they did their reviews, they specifically asked the question that the risk benefit to the recipient, not to, and then of course there's to society and to the family and to the community. But they were evaluating it on the risk benefit to that individual child who's getting the vaccine.
okay, now I never want to put our medical committee or members of our medical committee. It's time for Marv, but we're gonna stick around for a couple more minutes and have Marv a little bit later. Because it's our responsibility as a school to make policy, and we really try to use your very, very wise input to make that policy. But we're about 2 or 3 weeks away. Let's give ourselves to the vacation, but we're a couple of weeks away. It's cold outside. We've been serving lunch outdoors every day. We moved it indoors now, but we're separating everybody and still serving it in the classrooms. But we're 2 weeks away from having, as you just heard, 500 out of 630, so maybe 80% of our students who are 5 to 11 vaccinated. We'd like to bring lunch back. We'd like to bring groups back again, obviously following Omicron, but we'd like to bring vaccinated groups to be able to be together to eat. We have to make policies now around differences, and we've never had that. That's the truth. We've never dealt with that because in the middle school until now, 7th and 8th grade, it's been 100% vaccinated. The high school is 100% vaccinated. The mask mandate is not our decision, but we're kind of weeks away from having a small percentage of our community unvaccinated at that age, and then the majority vaccinated. How is that going to play itself out? Again, your perspectives. I'm not going to hold you to it in terms of the decisions that we're going to have to make, and I'm going to share that with our community when we figure it out. But having these mix of vaccinated and unvaccinated populations together, what do you think?
Well, the children and the families that got vaccinated should gain the benefit of a fully vaccinated environment. So to the extent that there are activities that are available to vaccinated kids where it's safe, because the rate of transmission, people are concerned about transmission, but in reality, the rate of transmission from a vaccinated person to another vaccinated person in a kind of random social setting is extremely low. The real incidences of transmission with vaccinated people happen in families or in other situations of really prolonged contact. So, and not even school, like 24/7 kind of contact. So, to the extent that the children can have a much more normal experience by virtue of being vaccinated, I think we want to encourage that, and we want to set up opportunities for them to do that.
Okay, yes. I mean, again, I obviously I'm not holding you responsible for the decisions, but just trying to get some color. I mean, as you guys know, we had our 8th graders go to Washington recently.
Beautiful.
That was, thank God, it was a successful trip. We did the testing before as additional precaution. The high school's done some testing, here and there. We, as a precaution before they had, let's say. Maccabee, which now is no longer a secret, I believe, once
Right.
the Prime Minister told everybody that it was happening. We have obviously, clearly been more open to interactions, closer interactions with kids who are unvaccinated. So that's that's kind of on the docket for us over the next couple of weeks. We did send out. We hope that our data is right. 500 out of 630. We think it's pretty close to correct. We know that there are people out there on the fence and respect that. And when we sent out the vaccination survey, we did get a couple of questions. One of them, which I don't think we really discussed that much, is people who have had. We haven't discussed it in this conversation. People who have had COVID before, recently had COVID. So somebody writes, "There's no medical evidence that the vaccine's risk-benefits profile is advantageous to their specific situation." So some people who are not yet vaccinated or not prepared to commit to vaccinating are asking about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, just overall and in general, there's an enormous amount of misinformation or disinformation that gets cherry-picked and used in what looks like very plausible and believable venues and phrasings. But overwhelmingly, they are misleading at best and just flat wrong at worst. I think there may be a window after one's been infected of, let's say, a couple of months where there's not going to be a big difference between whether one gets vaccinated, just because that's as you're recovering from the virus and that sort of a thing. But every study that's been done in Israel, where they've got amazing data and around the world, a well-done study, there is a 2 to 3-fold at least increased protection against infection amongst those who were vaccinated and had a history of COVID versus those who were unvaccinated and had a history of COVID. And as time goes by and more people are further away from their COVID infection, those numbers may be even different. And one of the key ways that this actually ends up working is that vaccinating on top of having a history of COVID actually prompts your immune system to be prepared for the variants. I know that sounds crazy, but the way that the immune system works is the more broad the response is, the more likely it is going to anticipate when the virus looks a little different. And that has been very clear from experiments to real life, the way it works. Yes, it's true that the vaccine was not protecting people against getting infected as well as having been infected over a certain period of time. And again, there are wide ranges of when people were infected, but there's no question that if you vaccinate after infection, you're far more well protected than if you have just been infected.
Okay, and that's what I remember we had this conversation in the summer. That's what you said then. You continue to say it now, and you think that nothing's changed, or it's been.
And the original thinking, which may have been true last, in 2020 with the early strains, the original thinking that someone who's had COVID cannot be infected again is just not true. I mean, it's just gone out the window.
Okay. Another comment, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but somebody did want to speak to the medical committee about, and I know, Dr. Lerner, that you've told us what you think about this. People are trying to understand, well, if it's just emergency use authorization, let's wait for the real authorization. Obviously, right, is it a fast-tracked authorization? Mm-hmm. Is it a fast-tracked authorization that people can, understandably say, I'd rather, have more data? How would you explain to people what emergency use authorization means and why you're confident in that before I don't think we have full authorization yet, even on the 12 to 16?
Almost. We have it on the 18 and above, and the 12 to 16 is being applied for.
Okay.
The real difference, it's procedural. It's a way of getting something on the market faster, and it's a way of the FDA approving it without having the full set of things that the FDA normally needs. So what the FDA is waiting for is not more clinical data, actually. They're going to do more inspections. They need more manufacturing. There's a lot of manufacturing details that they review, so they reviewed them in a more rapid fashion, and in order to give the full approval, they want mounds and mounds of more data from the manufacturing plant. It's not a question of whether it works or not works, or whether it's effective or not effective. That part they already reviewed and they agreed on. They're just waiting for a lot of more supplemental data on manufacturing in order to do the full approval.
Okay.
The other thing that the emergency authorization was employed because of this pandemic. It really hasn't been employed a lot in the past, but with it, these vaccines got out there, and the vaccines have now been used in, I don't know if it's more people than ever before, but the numbers are massive. So around the world, and I looked it up this morning, 8 billion shots have been given of all the vaccine types. In the U.S., it's something like 400 million, and of which, because we're talking about the Pfizer for the kids, the Pfizer one is the majority, so it's somewhere in the area of 300 million shots so far.
That's not people, that's shots, right?
Those are shots, so you can divide it by 2 maybe.
Okay.
But it's, big numbers. And with the children in the 5 to 11 group, we're already at this point in time, over 3 million children in the United States have gotten it. So, for people who are saying...
What's the whole pie of that
Oh,
age?
I'm sorry, I don't know the denominator. But, to the extent that people are saying, I don't want to be the first one, I want to wait till somebody else gets it. 3 million children already got it.
Now, 3 million children have gotten, nobody's had COVID, nobody had COVID more than 20 months ago, and nobody had the vaccine more than 10 months ago. So there are obviously long-term questions that nobody can say with certainty. So let's talk about potential long-term consequences.
Yeah, that's one of the big concerns. So the disinformation is a little bit easier it's easier to explain. It's a little harder to disabuse folks of that disinformation. The concern about what's going to happen long term, you haven't tested this for a long period of time in someone. First of all, nothing gets done that way in a placebo-controlled trial, nothing. And that's an important point to make ever in the history of medicine, for that long of a term to keep the placebo blinded to know if there have been side effects. The period of time and the numbers we've had now are bigger than most previous studies we've had on any other vaccine, just for the record. So the science is pretty good there, both for the adverse events, and for the efficacy. We do already see that a substantial proportion of children who had no problem with their initial COVID infection do have prolonged symptoms afterwards. And they're not like life-threatening things, but they're quite disrupting things. They can vary from breathing issues, from fatigue, from... people call it long COVID, but there are very specific symptoms that we see in our clinics frequently where they're seeking immunologic advice because of this concern that, it wasn't a big deal when they got the virus, but goodness, this stuff has lasted for a while. And that's, substantially even more common than the multisystem inflammatory syndrome. That's 1 in 1,000. It's a lot more than that who get these long symptoms. In some cases, they haven't stopped since they got COVID. On the flip side, for the vaccine, it's an important point to make that, so this one has only been in 8 billion people for a couple of, for however many months it's been. But there have been no longer-term consequences that didn't show up within the first 2 months of a trial. That's why the trial lasts that long. Those things people have thought about them, maybe, and there may be very rare things, always. There could be a very, very rare thing, but we're talking like Lotteryville, 1 in millions, and those will show up and they will make big news. But it doesn't mean that it's really impactful for any individual person. It's very, very rare. Any more than I love the statistic. Sitting on a toilet is substantially more dangerous than any of the adverse events, even in the trials that have been done. Substantially, it's just rare, so you don't really hear about it. I guess people don't talk about it.
Live and learn.
But regardless, those are real numbers. When something makes the news, it scares you, but it's still very, very, very rare.
This is at the time of it's been a long haul, and there's a lot of unknowns, and obviously people are. There's a range of anxiety levels, and people want to know. But I think that having this information is really, really helpful. I think we're a little over time. I'm going to ask one question because we do have a vacation coming up. Travel, don't travel a little bit. Any advice, or is that too broad a question?
Travel with seichel.
Travel with seichel.
I wouldn't go into a mosh pit in South Africa right now.
Good.
But I think that in more limited settings, and being careful and masking carefully and being vaccinated, fully vaccinated, I would pause before bringing any unvaccinated family members with me. I would pause. I would not feel comfortable.
Okay. Dr. Lerner,
yes.
Last word?
Vaccine is safe.
Okay. Okay.
Trust the biology.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for all that you do, and I am sure that our community will be listening to this, and I hope that the people outside of our community will learn from you, because I've learned a lot from you, and we all have, and we're very grateful to you. So, happy Hanukkah, enjoy your families, and thank you for keeping us safe and giving us the guidance that you've given us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for setting this up.
I'm just going to add one other thing, which you can either put in there or not, but I think an incredibly great exercise is to go look in the clinical trials that were done in the New England Journal of Medicine and in JAMA and other big journals, and look at the reactions that the folks got. Look at those reactions. See how much they happen. And look in the placebo column and look in the ones who actually got the vaccine. And if you just cover the side that is with the vaccine, okay, and you look at what happened in the placebo column, it's shocking. It's shocking. Death, disease, pestilence. 3 cases of throat closure immediately after the vaccine to the placebo. Okay? So just take a look at that list to give you an idea for why you might hear about things happening a lot, and that may not be because of the vaccine. Because what's in that placebo is just salt, not even the things that come with the RNA. So I just think it's an interesting exercise to do.
Study the data, look at the information that's out there, and learn from it. Educate ourselves.
The good information.
Sounds like a good,
right.
right. That's obviously a challenge. Thank you very, very much.